Hello everyone, welcome back to Understanding Your Openings, episode 2. Today on the agenda is going to be the various kinds of Grand Prix attacks. So we are still dealing with anti-Sicilians, and I would like to reflect back onto the Morra very briefly, because a few questions and suggestions were made in the comment section underneath the previous video, so I would like to address those. But first and foremost, let's have a look at the Grand Prix attack and its various forms that it can take. Usually it all starts with knight c3, knight c6, and right here, right now, I would like to clarify that if you are a Sicilian player who plays a mainline Sicilian without knight c6, so for argument's sake, you are a Najdorf player, for example, or you are a Dragon player, or you are a Scheveningen player, or you are a Khan player, or the list goes on and on and on. So if you are playing a certain variation that doesn't feature knight c3, it's very important that you understand that in this position after knight f3, or knight e2, white is technically threatening to return back to an open Sicilian by playing d4, and therefore both against knight f3 and knight e2 you must play e5 to avoid returning back into an open Sicilian that you don't play. If you are not willing to do that, then this knight c6 move order is not really going to work for you. But in my opinion, there is a lot more learning to be done if you play d6 here. Although that's a measure that one can certainly take. Although, once again, I do think that it's better to learn knight c6, and especially if you are an e6 player, like a Khan or a Paulsen player, then with e6 you have to learn so much extra theory. It's actually more worth learning all the knight c6 stuff and adding on top that e5, which is just a tiny variation, hardly anything you need to know. But let's jump right into it. So usually the Grand Prix starts off with f4, and we usually respond with g6. The idea behind these g6 types of developments is that white says, I don't want to play early d4, and we say, we don't want you to play d4 ever. And so, as such, it is a very center-focused strategy. So now we disallow d4 for the rest of the game. It's a very important concept that we very strongly deny any kind of d4 breakout. Now in this position we have got two main branches, bishop c4 and bishop b5, and in some ways they are quite different, in some ways they are quite similar. I'm going to address first bishop c4, which was the original idea of the Grand Prix attack when it came out in the 80s, endorsed by lots of British or English grandmasters back in the day. It has lost its popularity on top level. It's insanely popular on club level, which is another reason why it is handy that, or I hope it is handy that I put it on the agenda. Now here we do a funny layout of pieces that a lot of people confuse and apply in other Sicilian setups where it is perfectly inappropriate. So the reason why we are playing and in fact prefer e6 here, there are a number of reasons why e6 is not a bad move. In fact, I think it's a better way to put it than explaining why it's good. The reason why it's not bad, despite of playing g6, e6 together, is because white doesn't have access to d4 anymore, so they can't open the position onto us and utilize the current temporary weakness of dark squares. Another reason why it's not bad is because white never will have a chance to break out with d4. Why it's good is because it holds f5, it allows us to develop the knight to e7, which is desired because that allows our bishop to still keep on firing towards the center, denying d4. And last but not least, once the knight is on e7, it also allows us to legitimately fight for the center with d5. So if you put it in comparison with knight f6, then we see that now d4 is no longer under our control. d4 is possible, e5 is annoying, and we can't really play for d5 because we do not have sufficient backup. This is the reason why this is considered to be the best layout of pieces against the Grand Prix. Now here we have got two main chains. One of them is f5, the other one is d3. f5 is an extremely aggressive attempt to instantly try to attack on the king side and against the black pawn chain. And here Stockfish actually really wants to grab the material with g takes f5 and then play d5, which I have to say makes a lot of sense. But I would like to show you something that is less sharp, easier to understand, and just in general gives you a very comfortable play, and that is knight e7. This move essentially forces a capture, because otherwise now f5 is really hanging. I can take back with a piece, and after takes we take back with the d pawn. Okay, so the purpose of this move is that we open up again another piece towards the d file, and quite interestingly, this majority of 4 versus 3 on the king side means that now white will actually find it difficult to breach the pawn chain that we are going to build up, which is going to look like this. They castle and we play h6. Now normally when you see me talking about these moves like h6 and a6, it's usually in the context of me having a vicious go at playing lemons in a fruit salad style. Here it's a very important move that serves very, very crucial defending purposes, primarily denying the g5 square from both the knight and the bishop, but also the number 2 point behind it is that we actually expand on the king side by playing g5. Remember, this setup for white is designed to attack on the king side. So when you check out these moves on the board, your opponent will be very much taken aback because they are used to being able to attack on the king side. In order to understand that, I need to show you the main attacking pattern for white, which usually looks like queen e1, and now I'm just going to play a few lemon moves so that you understand. So the main attacking pattern from white's point of view looks like bishop h6, knight g5, and then the mate is incoming. Now I even ignored the f6, so I will actually take it, bishop h6, and then knight g5, and then we get mated. That's it. And so, obviously, once again, white is going to be scratching his or her head when they land in this position where not only did we entirely deny kingside attack, but it looks like even we might be the ones progressing on in the kingside later on. Queen g3, knight g6 to prevent any kind of shenanigans on g5, and white simply has got nothing. This is a textbook case where, for example, after bishop e3, knight d4, white has finished development. We clearly haven't. We still need a bishop and a queen to go somewhere, and yet our position is already far more promising because the white pieces are extremely incompetent to cooperate. Note that the bishop, which was meant to be the star of the attack, is really useless because these two pawns just blunt this diagonal forever. The knight really is not doing much at all, can't go to any of these squares, and the d4 square is very firmly in our hands, and pretty much e5 is going to be ours too. So it's very, very difficult for white to find a constructive plan. On top of that, they can never take this with the knight because c takes d4 is a really ugly fork on both of these minor pieces, and white certainly doesn't want to give up bishops in this position, and thus this position is already way, way better for black. So once again, a little bit slower. Let's have a look at this again. So f5, we don't take the bait. The bait, we just go like, yeah, whatever. They take on e6. We take back with the pawn on d7, so that now we have got a queen beautifully operating along the d file. And then remember this h6 g5 motif. It's so beautiful. g5. And yeah, after castles, knight g6, queen g3, knight g6, we just have a very sturdy, solid position that is very, very difficult to bite into. Now, far more common in the Grand Prix is the somewhat more realistic castles first, knight e7, and then d3 simply aiming to complete development, and then play queen e1, queen h4, and launch the attack with f5 as I described. Now we castle, and after queen e1 we go d5. And this is a very, very typical way to demonstrate that chess is first and foremost played in the center, at least when it's played well. Right before this attack could hit, we counterpunch in the center, and white is never ever gonna get anything remotely looking like a kingside attack in this setup. After bishop b3, we're just calmly playing b6, and this is actually a very frustrating little move. Not that it's easy to see why it's frustrating, but the point of the move is that the bishop can swing out here very often, causing a lot of drama down on the diagonal. For example, if they play queen h4, we jump into d4. And again, note that it's just a perfectly timed hop in to make sure that nothing dirty is happening to us. Knight d4 is probably only. If f5, then you really can take with either pawn, and also we can insert a timely knight takes b3, which is also very, very tempting. A computer line here goes like this: ef5, knight d4, bishop d4 check, and it's reasonably easy to see that there is not enough attackers here around the black king to cause any drama. I highly recommend you to analyze this at home if you are curious about the lines after f5, but trust me when I say this, that this is just not good enough. And after knight d4, we take with the pawn, forcing another piece back, and now we crack the center open with take, and look at the benefit of b6, bishop a6, full development, beautifully harmoniously developed pieces, whereas this random piece is all over the shop. And black is already way better. One potential plan here, once the knight gets protected, is to come and hunt down this bishop, and also we warmly welcome queen trades, because the rook here and here will be two very powerful pieces. c2 is backward and weak, and so on. The computer also likes here d3, by the way, which plays against this diagonal, or rather on that diagonal, and just in general utilizes the better developed pieces. Once again, one example line is knight c6. Very cool move, offering queen trades. If the queens come off, we regain d3 next no matter what, under far better circumstances. And if the queen drops back again, trade, and this endgame is way better for black. Better development, more solid pawn structure. The whole shebang is just way better for black. And that takes us back to, actually, to d5. So once again, bishop b3, b6, queen h4, and knight d4 is the jump in that you need to remember. It's a very annoying move because it trades off a queen side piece for a potential attacker. So this knight was meant to be a very important building block in white's attack. And so knight d4 always creates a very awkward situation where if you look at the board now, you realize that the only two pieces white has on the king side is a rook and queen. That ain't gonna cut it. It's just not good enough for a king side attack. So yeah, knight d4 is legendary. Probably a better or logical alternative to queen e1. Actually not better, but one that I need to mention is f5 again, which club players again like to do a lot to chuck this pawn in to accelerate the attack. And it is a valid idea more often than not. Here, however, once again, instead of taking the bait, we just go, yeah, nah, center, thank you. We have seen the dude's course about center, and it's solid gold, so yeah, that was an advertisement. So yeah, let's play chess in the center. And after bishop b3, you take on e4. There are other moves here that could be considered equally well, such as d4. But I like de because it clarifies the situation. It leaves no doubt about who is doing what. And if they take back, it's just Gonski. Free pawn. Free pawn, thank you very much. And you can be so cheeky that you can even leave f7 abandoned here, because knight g5 can be easily met by knight e5, and then c4 is going to shut that bishop in. Splendid motive. So yeah, ed, and if f6, which is a very common motive in this line, make sure that you always keep an eye out for this, because what it does is that it gives them a big fat tempo when they retake on e4. And very often in this structure, white gets the super nasty attack on these weak dark squares. Now, however, there is absolutely nothing white can show for the pawn. One reason is because knight d4 loses to the check on d4, which is going to win a free piece, and bishop g5 is just simply met by f6. Please do not be reluctant to make a move like this, especially not when you are a pawn up. Because people are like, oh, f6, e6 is very weak now. Whatever. Like, how will they exploit the weakness of e6? It's impossible. It's just too many pawns. The bishop drops back, and I'm hunting that bishop now, taking it e5 next. It's virtually almost resignable as far as I'm concerned. And as per usual, knight takes c5 usually lands in trouble. Now white has regained the pawn at the expense of a really, really nasty bad position. e5, f5, bishop e6, knight c6. Black dominates the center and has got the two bishops. Fabulous position. Don't be worried to chuck a pawn back like that. Although by no means do we have to. We can play here knight d5 and then defend the pawn if that's what we want to do. Knight e3 is also on the card, so they need to be careful with where this bishop goes. Overall, fabulous position. We come back, queen e1, b6, and there is no attack here. Knight f5, and the queens come off. Same old, same old. If anything comes to g5 later on, you can play f6, but right now white already has major issues sorting out where to go with the queen. And if queen h3, not that I think it's fully... Yeah, actually, h5 was an idea that Stockfish showed me before, but I'm more for just going caveman, trade, and win. This attack is nonsense. Like, once again, black has got more potent pieces on the king side than white does. And that's it. That's pretty much it. Queen e1 we have discussed already with knight d4, and with that, we have covered the bishop c4 Grand Prix. There is a fair bit of lines in there. So once again, I would like to invite you to understand that early f5, we allow the take on e6, and then we utilize the larger pawn mass to create an unbreachable barrier. Whereas if they don't go early f5, then we can counterpunch in the center with d5. Often we try to hunt the bishop down. And equally often we just come out here and hassle them on that diagonal as well. Take, bishop a6, and happy days. And usually endgames are your friends because of the better coordinated pieces, and in fact the better development as well. Now, in not contrast but more like in line with this, there is also a line here that starts with bishop b5. And this has become a trend, or this became a trend after the bishop c4 variation and its initial spark. And here the idea is to basically enter a better version of a Rossolimo. So one of the greatest problems from white's point of the Rossolimo in this opening is that white would die to have this pawn here. Then he would have a really, really awesome position with better central control and whatnot. But it's not there. And very often white has to lose a move or two to move the knight, play f4, and then come back. So the idea with this move order is to basically play an improved Rossolimo. Okay, so here if we allowed the c6 capture and we would have to take back with a pawn, that would be an amazingly good version of the Rossolimo from white's point of view. And therefore, we do not allow the Rossolimo. And here the most popular variation by far is actually this tricky castles line. And again, English grandmasters, in particular Gawain Jones, is a boss of this line. In fact, he wrote a book about the Grand Prix attack, which is pretty good. But I don't really believe in this line. He has had great success here with this line, which goes like this: knight b5, we definitely do take the bishop, and then d5. This is a very logical move because we have two bishops, they don't. We want the position to be opened up. And here e5 creates a lot of white squared weaknesses, and after d4 the knight can't retreat here, and this long diagonal, boy oh boy, with queen here, bishop here, is gonna be mental. So they have to take. Now, obviously, we can't take because of knight c7. And the idea is to play a6, knight c3. And here, white had a very successful variation, which was based on this idea of knight f6, d4, knight d5, dc, knight c, queen takes, king takes, pawn takes. And at first sight, this position looks extremely pleasant for black because we have got two bishops, they have got a triple pawn. But the truth of the matter is that almost all the time, black somehow can't find a safe haven for this king. And maybe Stockfish can defend it well enough, but Grandmaster practice has shown that it's a difficult endgame to play. It's a really, really tricky endgame to play. So for example, bishop takes, rook b1, king c7, rook b3, bishop back to f6 is important to stop knight g5. But even here, I think knight g5 is actually a move. And after take, bishop f4 check is very annoying. All the time, somehow our king is a little bit too exposed. And so I started playing here a pawn sacrifice variation as black with pawn c4, which I would like to invite you to analyze for yourself if you would like to enter a very interesting and exciting position where black may or may not have enough compensation for the sacrifice pawn. Quite fun to analyze. However, I found here again, cooperating with my favorite animal from the fish tank, good old Stockfish, knight h6. Typical computer move, but a very crystal clear idea behind it. And every time when the computer shows me something that I understand, I really like it. Not because of I understand it, but because that's how I like to rely on computer recommendations. If it says a move and I'm like, no clue why you're saying that, I will give a miss. But knight h6 is clear. It wants to deny d4 at all cost. And d4 right now is not playable, which is one of the main points of putting the knight here instead of here. Because now cd, knight d, queen b6 essentially leads to very, very bad positions for white. Because bishop e3 loses to knight g4. That's insta resignation. And if the knight drops back to e2, then we can just simply castle play rook d8, knight f5, and we are going to have tremendous pressure on the diagonal here and on the d file, and we will regain the pawn under far better circumstances. And so white has to settle for playing only d3, and then this knight on f5 is an absolute boss. And now I'm hearing you going like, yeah, but how will we regain the pawn on d5? Well, the irony is that it's A, we are not in a hurry. 2, it's essentially impossible for white to keep it. Because as soon as the knight moves, it drops. And there is no other defender that can come to the rescue of the pawn on d5. And so we can play very patiently by b6, bishop b7, castles, and eventually pinch the pawn. And that's basically it. I stopped analyzing the position here. We are comfortably going to retake on d5. And we will have, again, better pieces. This knight is better than that. This bishop is better than that due to the immense power down there. And we have a somewhat better central presence as well. Crystal clear, beautiful stuff. So one more time. Knight e4. Castles, knight b5, and d5. This is very important. Takes a6 and not knight f6, but knight h6 with the idea of re-entering the fray via knight f5. Really awesome stuff. I really like it, and I'm going to give it a go in my blitz games because I like to put my money where my mouth is. So I'm going to test this out. I have never had a chance to play it, and I really did like my pawn sec line that I showed you before, but I think this is far more reliable and therefore highly recommended. Now, if they take you on d4, you take back with the pawn, knight drops back to e2, and here there is a really awesome line. Again, a very clever idea that I would really highly recommend you to do. The knight goes to h6. It's a really nasty trick that is based on the idea that the knight is going to return the fray this way without walking into e5. And after something like castles, if d3, then they have to be very careful because he can come in from here. But we also can and should play here d5. And e5 for some reason here is no longer an option. Yep, Remember this. I knew that there was a trick here. So anytime when there is this double pawn shebang on d5 and the bishop is still on b5, queen a5 traps the bishop. a4, a6. See ya. So that's a very unpleasant move. And so they tend to drop back bishop c4 or even bishop d3. And there was a line that I can't remember now for the life of me, but there was a point in it where this knight wasn't on e2 and black plays knight g4, and the idea is that if the queen can't take it because d5 wins the bishop. It's really cool. But here you simply play e6, by the way, and after d3 again you have a fairly wide range of choices. d5 would be my go-to, where again if they take, you go like, oh, but double pawns. So, who cares about double pawns? Look at that. That is what matters in this position. Again, a5 is recommended to hassle the bishop. And after a4, now we have cut down that diagonal too. And you can go either knight g4 or knight f5 and enter on e3. The fact that you have got double pawns like this is irrelevant unless they can really pile up on them. Once again, we are experiencing a case where the white pieces are particularly passive and can't really develop properly. Another thing to note is that f4 is an absolute curse for white because it blocks in the bishop and the knight. Imagine this position with the pawn back on f2. They could come knight f4, attack d5 really efficiently, or they could go bishop f4, queen d2, rook e1, finishing development perfectly. Now even finishing development is a problem for white, because if I play bishop d2, I can't connect the heavies. So simple chess, e6 and then d5. That's it. And happy days. So you just want to make sure that this one comes via h6, because sometimes when we go to f6, then eventually this pawn on d4 could be hurt. Like here, e5, knight d5. This variation is a bit messy. I don't recommend this. You need to, yeah, be a little bit careful here. d4 is hanging. We played a lot of knight moves. It's playable. d6 is fine. It's coming, but I think it's easier to play with knight h6, keeping this pawn safely guarded and making sure that we can re-enter the fray via knight f5 or knight g4 as per this variation. If they take, again, you take back knight f5, knight g4, and if they leave it on, let's say they play bishop a4 with the idea of coming back from here, I'm going to show you now another nasty, b5. Beautiful, breathtaking tactics. The idea is that if bishop takes, we play queen b6, bishop is on, and as soon as something attacks it, we take e4, and they can't retake because d3 check picks up the horse. Awesome motive. And so they need to go back to b3, and then we take, and bishop b7. And now the pawn is really, really soft, and black is easily better. Actually, the computer's preference here is queen b6. Wow, we're already almost winning here because of d3, knight g4 threats. Ouch. Yeah, this is nasty. This is nasty. Again, white has failed to develop. Bishop b7 gonna come out, and all of our pieces are playing. Note the two bishops firing like mad, and white is just passively standing behind. And remember that this line is also designed for white to attack like mad. So it's a very bitter disappointment for white when they find themselves in this very passive position without anything to play for. And that's pretty much it. And before I let you go, I received a few comments about the Morra, so I would like to very quickly revisit it. Most comments came to me about the fact that indeed bishop g5 is best here, as was played in one of the stem games of this whole variation, which was the famous streamer Mark Esserman, who wrote, by the way, a beautifully brilliant book about the Morra called Mayhem in the Morra. And he played a game against the Dutch legend Luc van Wely. And in fact, he defeated Van Wely with the white pieces in a beautiful game. Now, to avoid such defeat, I actually recommend that in this position, once again, let's have a look from the beginning. So e6, 96, a6, 97. If bishop g5, we don't play f6. I recommend h6. I think this is a better way to go about it. If the bishop drops back to h4, now you have g5, bishop g3, knight g6. Almost identical setup to what we looked at in the previous lesson, but I reckon it's even better, because here our dark square control, in particular f4, is even more present, and we have got occasional nasties coming down with h5, h4. Therefore, I think their only reasonable move here is bishop e3. And again, I received a lot of comments about b5 moves here, but I think that b5 is actually helping white. I really do, because a lot of the times this bishop on b3 is a little bit like it's a better option for white to have this in, because sometimes the diagonal is weak after knight d5 sex, and also the rook on the c file can come in quite effectively. So my money is on knight g6, because usually you will find, and this is my other point, that very often white actually plays bishop b3 without even being prompted by b5. I actually did check this, and the engine claims that bishop b3 is the most logical move, if I'm not mistaken here. And more importantly, it's a very human move. Like, this is what Mark usually plays in similar setups. I checked his games, and why wouldn't I consult the greatest expert of this variation if I can? And after bishop b3, I would like to fall back onto my previous plan. I really do believe in it. That bishop b4 and this regroup really does pull the sting out of white's attack. If a3, I pull back. And I can't really see how white can realistically stop me from playing bishop c7, d6 castles in one particular way, shape or form, whichever I can. If I don't have to, I won't play bishop c7, but against bishop c5 I will. And that's it. I find it that although white's posturing is really, really impressive, I couldn't find a way to justify here the sacrifice material. If bishop c5, you drop back, and now d6 is essentially a game-winning threat, so knight d5 has to be tried here, which is the most common way really for white to try to stir the situation up, but not good enough. I take, they take, and d6 is the move that you need to remember, and it's just not enough. There's simply not enough attack here. Too many pieces get traded off, and I'm one move away from castling. It's just not going to cut it. And even after rook e1 check king f8, I'm a piece up. Like, white really has to kill me right here, right now, or it's all over red rover. And it is all over red rover because there is no kill to speak of. That's it. GG. And yeah, like, I just didn't really see how else I could improve this whole shebang for white from here, because if they fail to play an aggressive move here, I will just castle next, and I don't believe in the pressure because there isn't one. I will chuck a knight on e5. I will trade everything like mad. So I thought that this was the best way to play. Perhaps one would argue that there is a better move than bishop b3. The computer really likes rook c1. And again, there is a big argument for b5 here. And actually, the computer reckons that after b5, which is the best move according to engine, white should already go back to e2. And that's where I'm losing my faith fully in white's position, because after just a simple bishop e7, this fell apart entirely. So bishop b3 has to be played, but after bishop e7, knight d5 doesn't seem to work here according to the machine. But this is again the very line that I would be reluctant to allow as black. Although the engine claims it's okay, I would be more inclined to try again my bishop b4 thing. And if my bishop b4 thing doesn't work here, then I wouldn't go b5. So once again, let's see if I can use this. Looks like I can. I really like this. It is such a reliable motif structure that I think it's foolish not to try to make your life easier if you have the choice to do so. Why not coconut? Once again, a3, I drop back. And if I come back to c7, I play d6, I have no problems. And once again, I'm quite happy that I haven't played b5 yet, because that c-file counterpunch could be a little bit awkward to meet. So this is my opinion and my recommended line. Some people made comments about really deep variations and certain courses and whatnot. One of my objectives with this series is to focus on the whys more so than the hows. So I want you to understand lines, and I don't want to overload you with an insane amount of really, really deep variations. The whole concept of this series is understanding, doubly underlined, your openings. And so if we understand, for example, how this bishop b4 motif works in order to deny knight a4, knight b6, as well as to cover d6 sufficiently and to step out of this whole entire knight d5 taken and d6 motif, that's already good enough as far as I am concerned for you to play a rock solid game, because all you need to understand is that bishop e7, knight d5, sorry, that was a mouse slip, tends to be nasty in similar situations because of take, and then pawn d6 is incoming. And that's just unpleasant. Well, actually, it's better demonstrated with the bishop b3, bishop e7 line. Knight d5, take, and then d6, and nasties can happen. Although this particular move order is not preferred by the computer. Knight a4 is killing here. Like, that's exactly why we go bishop b4. But I just wanted to model why bishop b4 is the move more often than not, instead of bishop e7. One of them is the knight a4 plan, and the other one is that after knight d5, ed, this extra pawn d6 is really hurtful. I think that's how actually Mark's game went against Van Wely. But to cut the long story short, I think we should hold back b5. And again, the understanding is important behind it, so that this is going to be kept a little bit tightly closed. And also many a time this bishop on c4 is vulnerable to tempo moves like knight e5, especially once my other knight is on g6. So I'm not in a hurry to kick it out. And remember, your objective here is to develop this so that we can castle. So to gain a tempo for developing this bishop here is really not priority. That's the last thing I want to do. First, we need to develop this bishop and get the heck out with the king. So if bishop b3, bishop b4, I swear by it, drop back, and happy days. If they don't do something aggro, you go d6. And last time I already showed you that if they come in, you just offer queen trade, and thank you, Morra. It was fun to play with you. And on that note, I really would like to close off the Morra files as well as the Grand Prix files. And I think that our next video is going to be, it has already been requested by some of you, the C3 Alapin Sicilian, which is very logical given that we are dealing with the anti-Sicilians for the time being. That being said, I would like to put out a survey, for which reason I really want you, please, to check out my Twitter. If you haven't been following me, please do so, because I would like to put content out here in this series that the community really wants, especially, and I would like to emphasize it, when it comes to understanding stuff. There was a very good proposition that already came in one of the comments about the Nimzo, and asking him which line and at which point should we take on c3 and when to refrain from it, which is a brilliant question. It really fits into what I'm doing, so that is considered. But once again, when this video gets released, I'm going to, shortly after the video, put out a Twitter poll where you can vote, and I'm going to give a set number of openings that I think would be good to analyze, plus the last option of none of the above, please specify, and then you can comment on the tweet, and I will just see how the poll went, and I'm going to make a decision. That being said, if there are not enough people participating in the poll, then I won't count it as representative, and then in that case I might continue with what I think is best, and that's not out of disrespect, but I really want sufficient enough data to make sure that I do what the crowd really wants. Sorry for taking that long with this whole spiel, but I really want to make sure, guys, that I give you what most of you want and need. So please go to Twitter, look out for the vote and the poll, and we'll take it from there. Thanks for tuning in. Bye.